In the heart of a sun-scorched town in rural Nevada, a young woman of 18, fair-skinned and strikingly beautiful, stood trembling as she was auctioned off. Her parents, destitute and desperate, sought to profit by selling their own daughter. Abigail felt utterly humiliated, her spirit crushed under the weight of their betrayal. That is, until a poor black widower named Samuel stepped forward, offering every cent he had saved over his lifetime to buy her. What astonished everyone was not just his act, but the way he treated her, and the secret buried in his past. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of Dust Creek's main square, a place of dust, sweat, and malice. The bell of the small chapel rang, but it wasn't calling people to prayer. It summoned them to a grotesque spectacle. In the midst of a jeering crowd, men in tattered hats, women with sharp, judgmental eyes, a rickety wagon served as a stage. Atop it stood Abigail, shaking like a leaf in the wind, dressed in a tight white gown that made her look like a bride, though no one saw her as one. To them, she was merely a commodity. Her name was Abigail, 18 years old, with no memories of a loving embrace from her childhood. Her mother had died of fever, her father traded bread for whiskey, and her stepmother called her a curse, a burden to be cast off. Virgin, obedient, no tricks or whims, her drunken father bellowed. Who'll bid higher? The crowd laughed, their crude shouts slicing through the air. 30 coins, yelled an old man, his breath reeking of liquor. 40, another called, licking his lips. Abigail lowered her eyes, her bare shoulders burning under the relentless sun, the dress painfully tight, designed to display rather than dignify. With every bid, her heart sank deeper. She was unloved, unwanted, only sold. Then, a hush fell over the crowd. Slow, deliberate footsteps approached, steady and distinct. The sea of people parted as Samuel, a black widower known for his quiet demeanor and shunned by the town, stepped forward. Whispers followed him, rumors that he spoke to spirits, that he buried strange things in his yard. Yet no one dared mock the fire in his eyes. He climbed onto the wagon, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a carefully folded cloth. Inside were coins, 100 of them. "I'll give 100 for her," Samuel said, his voice firm and unwavering. The crowd erupted in gasps and jeers. The girl's father gaped, his eyes wide with greed. "That black man's lost his mind," someone shouted. "It's a sin," cried another. But the coins had already changed hands. The father stumbled off the wagon without a backward glance, leaving Abigail behind like a discarded sack. She stood frozen, without ground beneath her, without a voice. Samuel looked at her, his gaze soft but steady. He removed his worn poncho and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to touch her skin. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just respected her space. "Come," he said quietly. Abigail didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her tear-filled eyes followed the only man who hadn't looked at her like property. They walked through a gauntlet of jeers, spit, and crusts of stale bread hurled at them. In Dust Creek, the sin wasn't selling a daughter, it was a black man daring to buy her. The walk back was short but heavy with humiliation. Abigail trailed beside Samuel like a shadow tethered to solitude. His poncho, still warm from his shoulders, carried the scent of wood and damp earth, an unfamiliar smell, one of protection. Around them, the world seethed. Women spat on the stones where Abigail stepped. Men laughed, their mockery sharp. "The auction's virgin in the arms of that man," they taunted. Dust Creek had become a circus, but Samuel pressed on, head high, as if deaf to the hate. His eyes, though, burned with quiet fire. They reached his home, a modest cabin on the edge of Dust Creek, built of mud and weathered wood, steeped in silence. Abigail hesitated, her fingers trembling, her heart racing. Why had he brought her here? What did he want? Samuel opened the door and stepped inside, leaving it ajar without a word or command. She stood still as the sky darkened, then crossed the threshold. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon, tea, and thyme. Books were stacked haphazardly, a bed bore crisp linens, and a hand-painted portrait hung above the fireplace, a woman with dark skin, a sad smile, and eyes like Samuel's. Abigail wanted to ask but lacked the courage. He spread a blanket in a corner with soft straw. "You sleep here," he said. "Tomorrow we leave." "Leave?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "We're not welcome here," he replied. "Never were." But Dust Creek wouldn't let them go quietly. By morning, as the sun barely stretched over the town's crooked rooftops, Samuel's cabin was surrounded. Shouts, stones, and insults rained down. "Give her back," they demanded. "This ain't marriage, it's witchcraft." Abigail peered through the window, gripping the frame, her face pale with fear. Memories of the wagon, the leering men, and her father's coins haunted her like blades. Samuel stepped outside, arms raised, weaponless but carrying a quiet courage. The crowd met him with spit and shoves. Women who once called him neighbor now branded him a beast. Abigail tried to run to him, but hands grabbed her, hair yanked, her dress torn. "This is what you wanted, a savage to claim you?" one woman sneered, shoving her to the ground. The pain wasn't just from scratches. It was the sting of humiliation, sharp and relentless. A squat, pot-bellied guard in an ill-fitting uniform, drunk on his own authority, seized Samuel's arm. "You're under arrest for corrupting a minor and defying this town's morals," he barked. Samuel's voice cut through, steady as stone. "She was sold. I bought her freedom." The guard scoffed. "Freedom ain't a right here, it's a privilege." The mob dragged Samuel away amid boos and laughter, leaving Abigail crumpled in the dirt, her dress soiled, her body trembling. Yet in her eyes flickered a spark, not of defeat, but of defiance. For the first time, she didn't want to flee the world, she wanted to fight it. Sometimes, running is the only way to survive. For Abigail, it was the first time someone ran with her, not from her. Under a blood-red moon, Dust Creek slept in a false calm, its anger simmering beneath. In an old barn where pigs once hid from storms, Samuel lay bound, wrists swollen, lips bloodied. The stench of manure and hate clung to the air, but he refused to break. Outside, Abigail watched from the shadows, heart pounding, breath shallow. She'd escaped the old woman who'd locked her up to set an example, leaping through a window, cutting her heel on glass, but never stopping. She owed him her soul, the only one who didn't touch her, who covered her instead. At dawn, as the first roosters crowed, Abigail slipped into the barn, silent as an unspoken vow. She found Samuel, nearly unconscious but alive. His eyes fluttered open at her touch. "We're getting out," she whispered. "I can't walk," he rasped. She didn't answer, just cut his ropes with a stolen kitchen knife. Then she fetched an old burro from the church's stable. Their escape began before sunrise. Samuel draped over a sack on the burro's back, groaning softly. Abigail led the animal, her bare feet bleeding on rocks and thorns, toward the narrow mountain trails known only to wanderers and outlaws. The trail to the mountains was steep and treacherous, carved by cliffs and twisted trees, a path that led to oblivion. The sky lightened slowly, heavy clouds promising rain. Abigail's feet, bare and bloodied, pressed through stones and thorns, her mind haunted by the auction block, her father's voice, and the leering hands offering coins. The thin shirt she wore was torn, her hair matted with sweat, but she kept her eyes on the path. Samuel, feverish on the burro's back, clung to life. Hours later, they stopped by a stream. Abigail soaked a cloth in the cold water and pressed it to Samuel's burning forehead. For the first time, she saw him frail, human. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He opened his eyes slowly, a faint smile fighting through the pain. "Because no one else saw you like I did." She bit her lip, her chest tight. "What did you see?" "A life worth saving," he said. She didn't reply but stayed by his side, tending to him, guarding the man who had awakened something the world had tried to kill in her since birth: dignity. Rain fell gently like a blessing as they found shelter in a rocky cave. Abigail lit a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Samuel slept, his breathing labored but steady. She curled up near the fire, the pain of the town's words still echoing, but in the silence of the cave, a new certainty took root: she was no longer for sale. As the wind howled outside, Abigail learned that silence could be a home, that care could grow without touch. In the solitude of the Nevada mountains, they began to build something new, not just a shelter, but a life. High in the rugged hills of Nevada, the wind cut like a blade through the barren trees. The sky, ever gray, wept fine, relentless drizzle, as if mourning those who hid in its shadows. Tucked among the crags, a cabin took shape, built from logs, mud, and sheer will. Samuel, with calloused hands and weary lungs, worked with scavenged tools, each hammer strike blending with the caw of distant crows. Abigail watched from a stump, her face smudged with soot, her eyes less fearful. Samuel spoke little, but his actions were loud, patching the roof with broad leaves when rain poured, securing the door against the wind, brewing herbal tea and leaving it by her makeshift bed without a word. She learned to adapt, fishing with a line, gathering roots, reading the mountain's signs, where snakes hid, where shelter lay, where the wind whispered danger. Silence became their sanctuary, deeper than any touch. One morning, she found an old linen handkerchief on the table, washed and folded with care, beside a small apple from a stubborn tree clinging to the rocky soil. Samuel's eyes smiled as he chopped wood, and that night, Abigail dreamed of an impossible dance. Just them, in an empty hall, with only the wind and their heartbeats for music. While cleaning the chimney one day, Abigail found a hidden wooden box beneath loose boards. Inside was a faded letter, its feminine handwriting firm. "If I leave before you, promise to save someone who needs it, not to forget me, but to honor who I was, a woman loved by a good man." The name was Clara, Samuel's late wife. Abigail clutched the letter, her heart heavy. She was the one who needed saving, and Samuel was keeping his vow. Gratitude replaced her self-pity. They began to talk, of stars, tea, mountain tales. Abigail learned to smile with her eyes. Samuel rediscovered his with his lips. One moonlit night, she lit the fire herself, brewed sweeter tea, and said, "I'm not afraid any more of you." Samuel's eyes glistened. He nodded, understanding she was no longer a fugitive, but a woman forging her own path. Winter arrived uninvited, its icy winds slicing through the Nevada hills. The cabin stood firm, though cold, with Samuel keeping the fire alive, brewing tea, and reinforcing walls with mud and straw. Abigail fell ill, her coughs turning to fever, her hands too weak to hold a spoon. For 3 nights, Samuel didn't sleep, tending her with eucalyptus tea, cool baths, and whispered Guarani songs from his grandmother. In her delirium, Abigail clutched his hand, pleading, "Don't sell me." His heart shattered. "You're free, Abigail," he vowed. "No one will ever sell you again." She recovered slowly, and one evening, on a rock overlooking the valley's fiery sunset, she said, "You've never touched me." "Didn't need to," Samuel replied. "But I want you to," she said, her gaze steady. Their eyes met, and in that moment a quiet, real love was born, not of stories, but of shared pain and trust. Years later, a plague swept Dust Creek. Abigail and Samuel returned, laden with herbs, ointments, and linens. The town froze at the sight of her, once sold, now radiant with purpose, her hair tied with Clara's red ribbon. In the square where she was auctioned, she declared, "You saw me as coin, now see me as hands that heal." They turned Samuel's cabin into a clinic, Abigail tending the sick, Samuel brewing remedies. The town that once spat at them now whispered of miracles. One morning, a remorseful woman, Mary, who had torn Abigail's dress, begged her to save her fevered son. Abigail cared for him like her own, saying, "No woman should lose her child." The boy lived, and the town changed. Abigail entered the church, holding a wooden ring Samuel carved. "I want to marry," she told the hesitant priest, gesturing to Samuel, "the man who saw me as a woman, not a thing." Their wedding was simple, wooden ring, no veil, just love. The town watched, awestruck, as the outcast became an example. Decades later, Abigail, now gray, taught in a school built from the old barn. Children, like young Amalia, asked about her past. Pointing to a wooden statue Samuel carved, a woman reaching for the sky, she said, "He bought me from a cruel fate but never owned me." A sign read, "No woman has a price, all have value." Samuel passed peacefully, holding Clara's necklace and Abigail's ribbon. Alone, Abigail sat by his statue daily, whispering, "You were my hope." Her story, carried by every girl she taught, became a flame that never dimmed. Now that you've reached the end, give this story a like, share it, and comment below with your name and where you're listening from. Drop a red heart if you believe in new beginnings, and if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel.